Hello aspirants, looking at editorials and question bank for 9th December. The first editorial in the Hindu newspaper is a reform at risk. So this is regarding GST reform, goods and services tax, the new taxation regime which the government wants to implement by 1st April 2017. That is the start of the next financial year. But this deadline can be met only if the GST Council brings in a finalization on all the issues and in front of it, and based on this then the final bills which are proposed before the legislature, the parliament, are passed, and then the bill can be put into effect. So this whole roadmap has to be completed. It is detailed out here, you can see. So first of all, what has already been done is the 122nd Constitutional Amendment Act passed to amend the constitution, because this is related to taxation. So taxation rights are provided to the government based on the provisions in the constitution. So to implement this, first the Constitutional Amendment Act was passed. It has already been passed in the Lok Sabha, in the Rajya Sabha, and also approval by at least half the state legislatures as required is also done. So this is done. So step 1, as you can see, done. Step 2 has been done. Step 3 is GST Council to be set up. So GST Council chaired by the Union Finance Minister Mr. Arun Jaitley and comprising of all the finance ministers, any minister nominated by all the states and union territories. And also 1/3 representation is for the center and 2/3 representation to the states in terms of voting power. So 1/3 voting power, this goes to a deputy finance minister from the center or minister of state for finance. One minister is also there. So this is the whole composition of GST. All decisions are taken by 2/3 voting. If 2/3 members say yes, majority say yes, then that provision is accepted, otherwise it is not. Till date, the GST Council has been functioning through consensus. So consensus means everybody agrees. So now still there are disagreements, so it may be possible that now the GST Council would go ahead with a voting and find the strength. So this is step 3. This has also been set up. Step 4 is council to work out details of GST law and tax rates. So many GST Council meetings have taken place. Next is December 11-12. This is the next meeting of GST Council scheduled. So this is in the process. Finally, the taxation rates, the tax slabs have been finalized at the GST Council. Even the exemption list, which commodities would be exempted from GST. So some provisions have already been finalized by the GST Council, but some still remain. What is presently under consideration is the taxation administration. Who will administer taxes? What provisions will be under the center and what under the states? So what the center has proposed is vertical taxation segregation. So here you can see administrative control over taxpayers. So what has been proposed is that the dual control would be separated. So for commodities, some aspects the center has rights to administration, and for others the state would administer them. But presently what the states are demanding, and this is few states prominently, West Bengal, Kerala and Uttar Pradesh, these states are demanding that the vertical split should not take place of taxpayers, but all goods and services and all those who have a turnover of less than 1.5 crore, they should come under the states. So of course majority would be having lower turnover too. So these turnover for all commodities, not segregation of commodities and services, but for all commodities less turnover, less than 1.5 crore should come under the states also. So this is what they want right now. So on this again the GST Council meet is stalled. The finalization could not take place in the previous GST Council meeting happened just at the start of December. So because of this, now the Parliament session, the winter session of the Parliament which is going on, has few more days to go. So if the present meet does not finalize things and bill is not passed by the Parliament, then it will be difficult to meet the deadline of 1st April 2017. So that is the status right now. Even if the bill is, if the provisions are finalized by the Council and the bill goes before the legislature, and if these bills are introduced as money bills, so the legislature still needs to pass a bill. Earlier it was only a constitutional amendment bill to bring in GST. Now to implement GST, again legislature has to pass bill. So model GST bill is to be finalized, integrated GST bill has to be finalized, even compensation, 5 years compensation on any taxation loss due to introduction of GST is assured to the states by the center. So for that also there is a separate bill. All these bills have to be passed by the legislature, by the parliament. Only then GST can come into effect, after even the further rules and regulations are brought in from the next financial year. And if this procedure does not get completed in this format, then it will be delayed. The editorial says it may go to even October, September 2017. So this is the stage you can see. So after this, you saw council will work out. Finally, we are at this stage 4 right now. Then GST law will be passed by the parliament too. Then states will also have to pass their own GST laws too. So integrated central GST law will be passed by the parliament. State GST laws will have to be passed by all these states. Then detailed rules will have to be notified. Step 7. Then IT infrastructure, all processes have to be firmed up, tested, and then GST could be implemented. So this is the entire process. The other thing is about what is GST all about. That also we can see GST is praised for various positive aspects which will break in. What are these positive aspects and how will they come out? We can see here by an example. So it is from supplier, say supplier of raw materials, say cloth, so cotton or something. Supplier is there. He's making cloth out of cotton, and then the manufacturer manufactures shirt, you can say, out of this, and then the retailer sells it. There may be a wholesaler in between too, and then going to a retailer. So then that, and then finally to the consumer. So starting with the supplier, say supplier is having this cloth which he'll sell to the manufacturer. So say the cost price for the cloth is 100 rupees. On this 100 rupees, say taxation rate applied. Taxation rates are different for different commodities. Say for this commodity, taxation rate applied, we'll assume for this example is 6%. So if 6% is the GST tax, then on 100 rupees, 6 rupees means 6. So this 6 rupees will be collected as a GST tax. Then from the supplier, this cloth will go to manufacturer. Manufacturer may add up, he'll bring out a shirt. So this shirt, he will have its cost price of his selling price of 200 rupees plus GST would be added. So GST on 200 rupees would be 12 rupees. But out of this 100 rupees, on 100 rupees tax has already been paid. So value addition which is done by the manufacturer along with his profit is 100 rupees. So this 100 rupees amount will have to be taxed. So means the collection from here would be 12 rupees, but this 6 rupees which has already been paid by the supplier will be refunded to this manufacturer. So that is claim for input tax. You can see this is said. So this happens later. Right now we will pay 12 rupees because on 200 it will be 12 rupees. But then later he would get a refund of 6 rupees when the whole process gets over and all the data is with the government. So this 6 refund he would get because this has already been paid by the supplier. So without GST, actually there is double taxation, more tax incidence. Means this person also pays tax on the whole amount, this person also pays tax on the whole amount, and so on. So this refund would take place. So this is the positive aspect of GST. So this is the reason why it is said that finally the consumer will also have to pay less because less of tax is demanded. So then from manufacturer, say now it is going to the retailer. So retailer is getting it for 200 rupees, say he sell it for 300 rupees. So his price is 300 rupees. On 300 again 6% GST would be applied. So that is 18 rupees. So this 18 rupees will be paid as GST, but then remaining, so only 6 would be collected because 100 rupees is the extra addition which is done. Here also in this simple example we are assuming 100 rupees extra addition. So 100 to 200, then 200 to 300. So this 100 rupees paid 600 rupees only. So he is paying it 18 rupees, but then later he would get a input tax claim which he'll make and he'll get the remaining amount back. So he'll get 12 rupees back. So this is the whole idea. So now finally when it goes to the consumer will have to pay 318 rupees. So this is the 318 rupees which includes all. So 666. So 666 total is 18 rupees. So this total 18 rupees is tax. Otherwise tax would be much more. So that is why since taxation is less, so consumers should be also be able to pay less than what was there earlier. So that is the demand of the government too, that this profit or this benefit which the entire supply chain is making, it should pass on to the consumer as well. So it should be cheaper for the consumers as well. So for this also a new addition has been made into the provisions under the bill. So this is anti-profiteering authority. So this anti-profiteering authority would be set up that could penalize businesses if they are deemed to not have transmitted GST benefits to consumers. So this is actually criticized by this editorial, saying that profit motive itself is not evil. What will be the criteria on the basis of which this will decide? So this gives again discretion to this authority. So it will undo the fundamental intent of the GST, which is to remove the space for discretion and rent seeking. So this discretion should not be there, that they have the authority to claim that GST benefit has been passed on or not. So this is one aspect. So this is there. So going further too, you can see, so again the benefits here, what you can see of GST are prices would lower, and another important aspect is tax compliance would increase. One way is also because taxation incidence is less, because government is now demanding less tax, but also evasion, tax evasion cannot take place because the entire chain is linked. So wherever this is broken, like if the manufacturer, because the supplier would say I am paying the tax, then manufacturer, if he gives different data, then it will be caught that supplier has already supplied you, what are you doing? So to hold this tax infrastructure would be in place. It would be IT infrastructure, bringing in all this data into account. So this whole aspect is also to be implemented. So that will make tax evasion difficult in between. Otherwise the calculations would not match. So there is something wrong in some place that would clearly come out, and then there would be scrutiny. So nobody would want to keep anything out of the purview of the authorities. So that's why complete details would come out, and it will bring in tax compliance. So these are the positive aspects. So that is why it is said initially there may be a loss to the states, but overall in the long run it is bound to be beneficial. It will result in more taxation, tax collection for the government. So that is sure for this. Even VAT, it's the same thing. When value added tax was implemented, this is also a value added tax only. If you can see, it's taxation only on the value addition. So that was whole VAT was also about this only. But now VAT and all other taxes have been subsumed under goods and services tax. So there is one single tax regime. So this is what is the benefit of GST. So VAT is also subsumed under this. VAT on goods, on services, everything. So this is the whole comprehensive taxation law which the government is pushing to implement and needs support on this. So this is again an older viewpoint, but this was a verdict given, the pros and cons of GST. So it says this will simplify tax compliance for businesses, lead to greater efficiency in tax administration, unify the entire country into one single market, and of course boost economic growth. So cons will be not this. It says there are no real cons of this, but yes, initially the GST collection may not be up to the mark. So states will have to be compensated in the transition phase when the shift takes place from the older taxation regime to GST regime. So in those times it is seen that there may be not sufficient tax collection coming forth, but once the entire structure is in place and put into effect, the benefits accrue even before 5 years. 5 years the compensation is assured by the central government to the states. So this, it says GST is good for the economy, and the opposition also should come forward and support the government on this. Then the next editorial in the Hindu newspaper is Europe walks a tightrope. So this editorial is also in the background of two incidents which happened in Europe. One was in Austria, a far-right candidate, a conservative. Far-right is conservative. So conservative candidate, even earlier linked to Nazi regime too, Norbert Hofer. He came as close to as becoming the president. So he participated in the presidential runoff elections. He finally was defeated. But this is also a shocker that he could reach up to that stage. And other is about Italy, but Italy's case is separated out too, because it was a referendum on constitutional reforms reducing the powers of the Senate. We have already discussed about Italy in news. So in this referendum, the government's proposed reforms, constitutional amendments, were defeated, and that is why the Prime Minister, Mr. Renzi, has declared that he would step down, though it is not necessary or no compulsion is there, but because his reforms were rejected, he has taken over the responsibility and he is resigning. So he's stepping down. So these developments, and plus what we have already seen earlier in the year, Brexit, a shocking vote there when Britain exited from EU, European Union, and Donald Trump been elected as the president of USA. So this, it says that it is tempting to label this year as the year of resurgent nationalism. So even in Italy, the case is a little apart from all these cases, because it is on national issues within the nation, and it was also anti-establishment vote which is seen. So the bitter polarization of the electorate which is seen, that the opposition, and opposition in this case was also right-wing opposition, that tried to polarize the voters and attract voters towards its campaign, no campaign. So that was very prominent. So that is why it is put in the same category of resurgent nationalism. So this, it eventually ends the editorial as saying, as the divide between the elites and the forgotten men and women widens, the need to rethink liberal politics has become imperative. So liberal politics has failed. People are not satisfied with what the elites think is just, because it has not, this justice, this has not reached up to the lower rung, the lowest classes, the masses, and this forgotten men and women are now moving towards this polarized, they are polarized, and they are moving towards this right-wing extremist views, ultra-nationalist views. So this is what we are seeing presently. Then the next editorial, this is from the Indian Express newspaper. This is Abandoned House. This is regarding the present sessions of the parliament which are being stalled. So the opposition is protesting on demonetization issue, and that is done outside the house. So it is seen near the Gandhi statue in Parliamentary Complex that opposition protests are going on, and the Prime Minister is defending himself through his campaign on Twitter. So what is being demanded is that this political impasse, because of the demand to debate demonetization in the parliament. So both the opposition and the government are ready to debate, but the question on which they are stuck is whether voting would be there or not on this. So of course the opposition wants voting on the demonetization debate, and the government is not keen on voting. So this is one point on which the Lok Sabha, because voting in Lok Sabha is of significance, but in Rajya Sabha, if the voting has no significance, if Lok Sabha voting the government is defeated, it shows that there is not sufficient confidence of the Lok Sabha in the government, and that may result in the fall of the government. So voting in Lok Sabha is important. It should get majority in the Lok Sabha vote. So this is one issue, that the government does not want voting in Lok Sabha. And in Rajya Sabha, the issue is about Prime Minister's participation in the debate. So the opposition is insisting on the Prime Minister's participation in the debate on demonetization in Rajya Sabha, and the government is not keen on this. So these are the points on because of which both Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha are seeing abandonments and adjournments of the sessions. So what is the way out of this? So the editorial is demanding that there should be a way out from here, because even the president has said to the parliamentarians, for God's sake, do your job. Even L.K. Advani raised his voice. He said, who is running the parliament? Who is running the house? So these statements we made show that there is a need to end this political impasse. So demonetization as such is a move which the government has taken, which will have important short-term, long-term consequences, but it cannot bypass the debate in the house, because it is saying it is representative of the people, and it is the people are with them. But then these are the representatives the people have elected to represent them in the house. So how can you not have any responsibility towards them? So why is the government not ready to? Because opposition is abandoning the parliament is clear, but then government also has a responsibility, because it is the one which is running the house. So it should take over this responsibility, have some sense in the matter, and reflect statecraft, demonstrate that, and show generosity, and bring the parliament back on its feet. So government has to take the initiative. So this point is there. Plus another point highlighted is that the parliamentarians have nothing to lose. MPs will not lose anything if they don't perform. So this one aspect also badly affects parliament's performance. The editorial concludes by saying that government must ask itself if it can afford not to engage with the concerns of the people's representatives while appealing directly to the people. So people's representatives are also the ones it is answerable to. Then the next editorial in the Hindu newspaper is Green Stakes. Donald Trump has been elected as the president of USA. But before this, his points of views on the connection between climate change and human activities were that there's no connection. So now he's saying that there is some connection between human activities and climate change, and he says that he would keep an open mind on environmental policies. But then these people are called climate skeptic, means they don't believe that human activities induce climate change. So then the reason being that then there is no requirement for any environmental policy and cuts being brought in on economic activities. So these are the point of views. So though he is claiming now that there is some connection and he'll keep an open mind, but the action which he has taken after being elected POTUS means President of the United States. So after being elected president, he has appointed a climate skeptic, Scott Pruitt, as the head of US Environmental Protection Agency. So this action itself speaks a lot. So if he has appointed a climate skeptic who does not believe in human activities and climate change being connected, so then you can see what environmental policies will come forth. So he is an ally of, Pruitt is an ally of the fossil fuel industry, because if there is no connection, then there is no need for reduction in fossil fuel production and use of fossil fuels. So that is good for this industry, that you can have as much emissions as you want. Climate is not affected because of all those activities. So that is what the climate skeptics believe in. So this action is what is a concern. Barack Obama administration, it says, had done a lot. It was the most progressive regime in the US on the matters of climate change. So he has taken important policy decisions on environment. He has ratified the Paris Climate Accord. That was also done to ensure that post his at the end of the term, whoever becomes the next president, there was a possibility that Donald Trump would be elected. So this Paris Agreement should not get stalled. So US had passed it within the deadline, before the presidential term gets over. So this was done. He ratified the Paris Climate Accord. But all these, it says that it stands on a weak ground because these have been done through executive orders. So executive order means order from the president's office. So because it is an executive order, it can be cancelled anytime by the next executive, that is under Trump administration. But if it would have been passed by the Congress, the parliament, then it would be difficult for Donald Trump to negate it. So that is highlighted. But the editorial also highlights that there is less possibility that Donald Trump would step out from the Paris Agreement. So USA would continue to be a ratifier of Paris Agreement because there is already pressure on him to ensure that Paris Agreement global consensus on climate change is accepted by him as well. Plus, it is also highlighted that countries like France and Canada have already threatened USA that if it steps out of Paris Pact, then they would impose a carbon tax on all goods produced in USA. So such threats are also coming forth. So he may not come out from the Paris Agreement as such, but then there are still possibilities that high possibilities that US would become very stingy, having a very close purse on providing aid to developing countries under the Green Climate Fund. So this aid coming forth from USA may reduce. So this is a point which may happen. So, but then it is required that USA, which is the second largest emitter of greenhouse gases in the world, the first largest is China, India is the third largest in terms of absolute volume. Per capita, India is low. So that is why it says that it is important that it finds moral and international obligation to ensure that climate change, actions on climate change are taken by him as well. So these are the editorials. Next we look at the question bank. The 3 questions have been picked up. The first question is, former Prime Minister of India calls demonetization a monumental disaster. So this is Manmohan Singh's point of view. He has given a complete lead article in the Hindu newspaper. The question is, discuss the pros and cons of demonetization, highlighting the intention behind it. So demonetization has been done with good intentions. This Prime Minister Manmohan Singh has also stated that the intention is good. 2 aspects which the government has highlighted. One is to break the grip of corruption and black money, and second is to eliminate the fake currencies which are emerging coming from the enemy country on the border from Pakistan. So these 2 are the reasons for bringing in demonetization, and both are honorable and deserve support wholeheartedly. But what he highlighting is that the good intentions are fine, but it is a road to hell. So it says, there's a popular saying, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. So he says that most policy decisions are risky and they have unintended consequences. But the role of the government then is to balance how much risk it can take, how to balance the unintended consequences with the benefits which will accrue. If that balance is not well maintained, then it will result in a disaster. So that is one point he is highlighting. And then he comes to break the whole notion. So first he says that this notion of black money in cash is a false notion, because black money is, all cash is not black money and all black money is not in cash. So it's targeting all cash. And then black money is in other forms too, forms like land, gold, foreign exchange. So there are so many avenues in which you can keep black money. So, and all these rich have these resources and they can convert their black money into these. But for the poor, the normal common man, it is cash in which they store their currency, and that is not black money always. So then that is to be highlighted. Earlier the governments have taken various initiatives to bring out this black money through actions by income tax department, enforcement department, voluntary disclosure schemes. So they have been targeted. They are not affecting all citizens, but this initiative is affecting entire country. So that is another point, that such targeted strikes earlier have unearthed much unaccounted wealth. So, and it did not affect all citizens. Next he comes to the 2000 rupee denomination note. So that is again, when you are targeting black money, when the intention is that there should be no black money, then in future again you are bringing in avenues to bring in black money, because 2000 rupee note cannot be used generally in the market, and when you are moving towards cashless economy too, so higher transactions should not be done in 2000 rupee note. Then what is the use of this 2000 rupee note? So this will again come as stacked in the homes, and then it would again be a source of black money. This is targeted. So it's not a clearly spelled out policy, well planned policy which has come forth. Then again, another point put forth is, when you are targeting black money is a small minority. Or even, sorry, next point is about fake currency. So when you are targeting fake currency is only a small fraction of the entire currency in the economy. So to eliminate this very small fraction, you are making all currencies, all notes ineffective, demonetized. So that is like, if you buy a kilo of rice and there are some small stones in it, what do? You remove those particles, or you throw out the entire rice? So that is the question put forth. So this, because there are inefficiencies with the income tax department, the entire administrative machinery, the police machinery to prosecute cases, that is why this is the easier way which has been taken. So this is another criticism. So this is about the 2015 study about how much fake currency is there. So it's only 0.25% of the total budget outlay. So that is highlighted. This was a study done in 2015 by Indian Statistical Institute of Kolkata. Then the next point he puts forth is the people been suffering. So it says that, he says, more than 90% of the India's workforce still earns their wages in cash. So there are so many agricultural workers, construction workers, daily wage earners, they are drastically affected. Of course, then again you are saying that demonetized currency, there has to be exchanged in the banks, but then bank branches are not there to that penetration in rural areas. Then rural areas, they would be suffering, because many villages, towns, there are more than 600 million Indians who live in towns or villages with no banks. So it's a fundamental duty of a democratically elected government to protect the rights and livelihoods of the citizens. So the weak have to be taken care of, rather than the government abdicating its responsibility towards them. So this is point highlighted. Other things like cooperative banks were not brought into the purview of the this initiative of demonetization. The exchange could not be done at cooperative banks. So this is one point, though Manmohan Singh does not speak of that. ATM recalibration, this issue was not foreseen. So this resulted in quite difficulties for the people. Even the Supreme Court presently is saying that you allowed cash withdrawal limit of 24,000, but it's not available with the banks. Means that much amount of money is not there with the banks. So still people are suffering even after a month of demonetization. So the logistic challenges Manmohan Singh says that yes, logistic challenges would be there because it's billions of old currencies which have to be replaced by new ones now. So it's a huge challenge. In most of the nations where such demonetization initiative takes place, it is difficult. And when India, which is much larger population plus so diverse a population, it's much more difficult. But then these nations which undertake demonetization, they have this done over a period of time. It's not an overnight initiative. So that is also one point which is highlighted. So the government gives time to the people till the time frame that the money is still valid. It is not demonetized immediately, but over a month it is valid, and or some time frame, and then it becomes invalid as a currency. So this gradual process is what other nations do, but India did it overnight. So that is there. And finally, it says the effect on the economy. So of course there is a slowdown. When industrial production is shrinking, job creation is shrinking. We saw even the Monetary Policy Committee, we saw this in news that Monetary Policy Committee also reduced its forecast for GVA growth rate from 7.6% to 7.1%. So of course economic slowdown is another aspect. So he says that though India's cash to GDP ratio is very high, still it will not be able to overcome this, and it also shows that Indian economy is dependent a lot on cash. So how much it will affect the economy is also clear. So of course GDP growth and job creation would be affected. So these are some points which is highlighting on demonetization. Then the next question put forth is, biodiversity integration into development plans is crucial for sustainable development. Discuss. So biodiversity basically means variability among the living organisms from all ecosystems, terrestrial ecosystems, aquatic ecosystems, marine ecosystems, and so on. So biodiversity is of different types of diversities like genetic diversity. So each species are having genetic diversity. So variability within the species, like humans, Homo sapiens, a species, we are genetically different. So that is genetic diversity. Species diversity, because different types of species are present in an ecosystem. Ecosystem diversity, because there are different types of ecosystems. So all these are parts of diversity, biodiversity. And biodiversity plays various important roles because it helps in maintaining, balancing the entire world ecosystem. So this aspect, like water purification, waste assimilation, cleaning of air and water, this is possible through this complete cycle in the biodiverse world. So this regulation of pest management, soil nutrient management, maintaining the fertility. So if biodiversity is affected, all these roles would also be affected. So this is important, that because biodiversity, it says, helps in mitigating unpredictable global changes and natural disasters. So that's why biodiversity in goods and services is important. Also it provides resources for these indigenous people, the poor, vulnerable, who are dependent on biodiversity resources like food and other minor forest produce. So this is one aspect highlighted. Then economy and biodiversity have a relation. India is also one amongst the 17 mega diverse countries in the world. So we are rich in biodiversity and even traditional knowledge systems on this biodiversity. But then our resources are limited because we have 18% of the world's population, but only 2.4% of the land and only 4.2% of water resources. So we are undertaking rapid economic development in terms of industry, infrastructure, but this is negatively affecting the biodiversity. So if biodiversity is not taken together, then both, because these industries also depend on biodiversity. So it depends on biodiversity and impacts biodiversity too. So it would be drastically affected if we over exploit resources. Then these resources cannot be renewable. So though resources are renewable, but over exploitation will not tender them renewable anymore. So they will not be renewable anymore. So India has to take this into consideration while undertaking economic activities. One prediction is that also India will become water scarce by 2025. So this is through a study. So all these aspects highlight that we have to work towards containing climate change, to containing pollution, bringing in emissions from industries, transport sectors under control. Polluters pay principle should be implemented. The effluents and industries and domestic sewage, how these are disposed of is important. Solid waste management is important. So all these will happen only if we mainstream biodiversity. Means along with undertaking economic development, it is also important that biodiversity concerns are also included. So if that happens, only then that we'll be able to sustain economic development. So that is mainstreaming biodiversity. So there are examples also given about how can this be done, because all activities, it says even agriculture has its effect. So like we are applying chemical fertilizers in agriculture, so to optimize the utilization of fertilizers, even to the extent that using organic manures, will have positive developments. If over exploitation takes place and more of chemical fertilizers are applied than desired, then it would result in negative impacts on soil, groundwater, and even the habitats wildlife are affected through these chemical fertilizers. So it will put the entire balance of biodiversity haywire. So this is one aspect. Then also another is how can this be done through mainstreaming biodiversity, can be through community based joint forest management, which India undertakes to. Traditional multi-species should be promoted. Multi-variety agriculture should be practiced so that biodiversity is maintained. Even recently we saw IUCN in its recent analysis has given also put some wild species of food crops under the category where they are threatened. So this shows that if genetic diversity is threatened, then also biodiversity would be threatened. So these are the aspects highlighted. So what is needed is internationally and nationally actions need to be taken. So under National Biodiversity Strategies and Action Plan, under Aichi biodiversity targets internationally, under Convention on Biological Diversity have to be fulfilled by India. Indian National Biodiversity Act should also be effectively implemented. Central state governments should all work together. Even research institutes should bring in what strategies could be brought in to contain effects on biodiversity, to ensure balance between economic development and biodiversity. Even public-private entrepreneurs and the public themselves can come forth and play a role in mainstreaming biodiversity. Then the last question is the current anti-defection law too weak, or should the anti-defection law be abandoned as it has not been effective? How can defection be deftly handled in India? So this is regarding defection. What do you understand by defection? Defection is when a MP or an MLA defects, changes his political party after being elected as the member of the legislature. So this is the anti-defection law. It was brought by the 52nd Constitutional Amendment Act as under the 10th schedule to the Constitution of India. So if you have done polity, you'll be aware of all these things. So disqualification is if a member of the House belonging to a political party voluntarily gives up his membership to that political party, or votes or does not vote in the legislature contrary to the directions of the political party. So there's a political whip which asks its members to vote on a particular matter or not vote on a particular matter. So if you go contrary to this, then it is disqualification under defection. And it says that however, if the member has taken prior permission or is condoned by the party within 15 days from such voting or abstention, then the member would not be disqualified. So that is for the second point. Then this is one way. Then another one is if an independent candidate joins a political party after the elections. So he is elected as an independent and after election he is joining a political party, he is disqualified under defection. And third way is if a nominated member. So nominated member joins a political party. So nominated is not through elections. So like there are nominated members in Lok Sabha, Rajya Sabha. You should be knowing if you've done polity about Anglo-Indians and people of special knowledge or practical experience who are nominated by the president to Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha respectively. So if a nominated member joins a party 6 months after he becomes a member of the legislature. So if he joins after 6 months after nomination, then he is again disqualified under defection. So these are the provisions. Again, there is no clarity of why an independent immediately after joining a political party is defecting and a nominated member after 6 months is defecting, because he is nominated by the government in power, because the president is appointing him. So he is given 6 months time frame. Within that he can join a political party, and post that then he has to be disqualified. So power to disqualify, this is important, is with the chairman or the speaker of the house. Speaker in Lok Sabha, chairman in case of Rajya Sabha, in case of state legislatures too, on the same manner. So if a complaint on defection is received, the member of the chairman or the speaker would take the decision and his decision would be final. So this is there. Then exceptions are given. So these all are disqualifications, but then there is an exception that in cases of merger, when political party merges with another political party, then that is not defection. If 2/3 of the members also merge with another political party, at least 2/3, then also it is not defection. So earlier it was 1/3, by an amendment in 2003 to the anti-defection law, this has become 2/3 now. So defection in bulk is not defection. So of course there is no scientific a clear basis, rational basis of this 10th schedule defection law, but then that is what we have in India. So the question here is the current anti-defection law too weak, or should the anti-defection law be abandoned? So we have understood about defections, and there have been such defections which still keep on taking place. We have seen recent cases also of Uttarakhand and Arunachal Pradesh, when the president's rule was imposed because the government lost its majority, when almost all, also in case of Arunachal, almost all the members except one, except the chief minister, then defected and joined the other political party. So such cases show that defections still take place, defections in bulk are taking place, and the members, the elected representatives, are finding ways to avoid defection. So defection is still taking place. So if there are different types of defections, this article argues. One is defections in bulk, where 2/3 members, that criteria is taken into consideration and defection takes place. So there is no disqualification then. Second is defection during pre-election season. So just when the term is going to get over and there are elections which are scheduled, so the defection takes place such that the time frame which is given for them to seek a fresh mandate, that coincides with the pre-election election to the legislature. So this helps them to avoid losing anything. So that is another way. Third way is when the defection takes place just after elections. So the ruling party is the one to which MPs and MLAs defect then. So this is another way of defection. So how to take care of this is the question. So dilemma here is actually between the notions of a delegate and a trustee. So trustee notion was put forth by James Madison when he said that the function of the legislator is to represent the viewpoints of his constituency in the policy making process. So he is only a trustee. So viewpoints of the constituency have to be taken into consideration when he is acting in the legislative house. And the second aspect, another way of looking at it, is delegate notion. So that was given by Edmund Burke. He said that the political representative should follow his own judgment, and he should decide what is the best course of action. So these are the two notions, of course quite distinct and opposed to each other. So now here the dilemma is between which to adopt. So many democracies across the world have not brought in anti-defection law. They believe that legislators have their delegate notion in place and they use their judgment to decide what is best. So this is used like in UK, Australia, USA. They are not having any anti-defection law. So here parliamentarians and senators take positions contrary to their party's points of view. Also, they also vote against the party's view and still continue to remain within the same party. So that is allowed. So delegate argument is what dominates here, that legislators should be allowed to express their views, and a defection law is in contradiction to the delegates' freedom of choice. So this is the point of view internationally, but then the article is arguing that the case with India is different because the way political representation takes place in Western countries, Western democracies, is different. But in India, voters tend to vote for the political parties rather than the candidates. So in such a case, Indian voter is voting for a party, and then after coming to the house, after coming to the legislature, if the politician defects, if that elected leader defects, then he is defying the faith or the confidence with the electorate put in him. So it's going against the will of the people. So that is why it is important that anti-defection law should be brought in India. Otherwise, it would lead to violation of people's mandate. So that is why we did bring in an amendment to that was a 52nd Amendment Act to the Constitution which brought it, the Anti-Defection Law brought in, and then even an amendment to this Anti-Defection Law through 91st Amendment Act of 2003 when this 1/3 was changed to 2/3, which we already saw. So now how to tackle this? Another aspect here is discretion of the speaker, because final authority to decide on this is the leader of the house, the chair of the house. So that will be chairman in case of Rajya Sabha, speaker in case of Lok Sabha, and even similarly in legislative assemblies at the state level. So he has complete discretion. So a partisan role played by the speaker. If the speaker is partial, then the whole issue becomes difficult to settle. This article argues that there should be an independent autonomous body which should handle the cases of disqualification so that an unbiased decision comes forth which can be effectively handled. So there are ways required to ensure that defection is minimized or rather eliminated so that effective functioning of the house can take place.